So today we have some more tidbits for the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Ultimania, including some details on the affection system and how at one point Nomura didn't want us to know how it worked. We also have some hints at what that white feather at the beginning of Rebirth could be alluding to, and also where does the franchise go after Part 3. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you're new here and you'd like to stick around, you can subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Once again, thank you to the Shinra Archaeology Department on Twitter for putting together all of the information from the Rebirth Ultimanias and providing us some cool details. So we start off first with that affection system and how Nomura at one point wanted to keep it completely hidden. The SAD goes on to say, in the original FF7, the affection system was a totally hidden element, but this time you can check on the progress you've made, albeit only after the game's ending. Nomura says he actually was among those partial to keeping the affection system hidden, but he respected the staff's opinions and they made it visible the way it is now. The number of characters who gain affection points has increased since the original game, and the Gold Saucer Date event is now much more elaborate. He thinks it was the right call, since getting an exact idea of the points you've gained helps you enjoy the whole affection system kind of like a mini-game. The affection system in Rebirth is super cool, and when you're first playing it, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. So it's like, I might have a good relationship with this character, what boosts my relationship with this, is it side quests? And then there's the conversations you can have with the multiple options, and I don't know if anyone else felt this way, but I sometimes got decision paralysis. I didn't know what option to pick. I wanted to pick the nice option. I didn't want to screw things up with the characters that I was working with. Because full transparency, baby, I was going for Tifa on my playthrough. That's the love of my life. I'm like, I gotta get Tifa at the Gold Saucer. She's my date. And I treated everyone pretty equally on my playthrough for the first time, but I did end up with Tifa, so I was pretty happy about that. In the original game, it was much more ambiguous. You didn't really quite know what was going to affect the relationships you had with the different characters, so you were either mostly going to get Aerith or Tifa on your date. Some people worked really hard to get Barrett, which was pretty cool. But again, the affection system is really cool, and it is again tied to the story. It's not just there to be there and build relationships. Again, the foundation of Rebirth are bonds between the characters, which makes doing side quests and even mini games that much more fun, because you're not just learning more about the characters and the story, but you're seeing those actual bonds and relationships between the characters actually play out and grow and get stronger. So I feel like it makes it much easier to get attached to those characters and how their relationships are actually working out. And I am glad they decided to actually show how the affection system works. Granted, you have to beat the game, and even then, once you beat the game, you can go through on New Game Plus, and you can pick whoever you want for the Gold Saucer Date, because there are so many different cutscenes that can play out. I think there's like 2 cutscenes per character at the Gold Saucer. There's like the regular, and then there's the more intimate one. But what I appreciate is that they're not just throwaway scenes. There are actually some big story things that play out, whether it's Yuffie talking about Zack, Red 13 revealing that he had more information that he and Aerith had, but at some point it was stripped away from them. There's potentially the funniest one, which is Cloud, Sid, Vincent, and Kate Sith, who go on this really awful date where nobody's having any fun. Kate Sith is trying so hard to kind of keep the energy up and be fun and entertaining, and Sid and Vincent, they're just not having it. Cloud's like, what am I doing here? So it adds a lot to the story. And to be able to see the details of these relationships and be like, oh, this side quest actually builds up this character, or if I do enough synergy skills and abilities and odd jobs, that also builds up our relationship. So it is kind of cool if you go through and you decide to do a new game, not necessarily New Game Plus, but you're like, I'm going to start fresh and I'm going to work on Tifa, or I'm going to work on Aerith. You now know, okay, I should probably stick to these things. I should probably use the characters a little bit more in battle. It's a really cool system, and it makes me wonder, will it carry over to Remake Part 3? These friendships and these bonds have already been established. However, characters like Kate Sith, Vincent, and Sid are brand new. We don't really quite have relationships with them, so I'm curious to see if they bring over the exact affection system over to Part 3 and we can just kind of woo people all over again. I think that might be pretty interesting. I kind of hope they do. It was really fun to have these different conversations with the characters and just see their different reactions to specific things, and just knowing that you're actually getting closer to the characters is great. Up next, Kitase talks about fate. They go on to say, Rebirth producer Yoshinori Kitase says that they consider the original story to be the fate of the characters. The question of how the protagonists will fight against that fate and how they will face it is a new theme unique to the remake series. So that one seems a tiny bit confusing on first read, but then again, I am a little bit slow. But how I kind of gauge that is the original FF7 happened. That was a story where things played out from beginning to end. But with the remake trilogy, it kind of being like this sequel that takes place maybe in a different world or a different timeline, we now know what those original fates are. And so do the characters. So now it's kind of like, let's fight against fate, which leads into a big can of worms about, what happens with the ending? Do they change it? What's the point of doing, an entire remake trilogy if things are just going to end up the same? And I kind of feel like that might be the point, which might sound kind of stupid, but stick with me here. Because one of the things a lot of fans are talking about is, will characters like Aerith and Zack actually be brought back? Will they stay alive? Will they be brought from a different world? Will they be resurrected? Who knows? And if they don't, then what's the point of doing the remake? I think it's a number of things. I think the biggest thing is that they get a second chance to really kind of flesh things out, expand more on story stuff that they couldn't in the original game. There's also the technical aspect of now they can do so much more with these characters in this world with the consoles we have nowadays. And we've also talked about incorporating things from the compilation in a way where it now feels organic. It's not just kind of tacked on. And with us and the characters now knowing about all of the stuff that's already happened in the compilation, at least to a degree for the characters, I think this time around, yes, they are fighting against fate, and I do think some stuff will change. I think this remake trilogy will end with the defeat of Sephiroth, and I mean like the definitive defeat of Sephiroth. This fool ain't coming back. He ain't gonna be in Rush Hour 3. I assume Meteor will still get cast, but we have no idea if it's gonna do as much damage as it did in the original. Who knows what's going to happen with Holy, because there are a lot more new aspects to the remake trilogy, specifically with Sephiroth. We don't really know what his intentions are. There's the Edge of Creation stuff. There's also the stuff within the live stream and all of these different worlds. And I know there's a lot of people out there that really, really want Aerith and Zack to survive. And for me, I don't think that should happen. And I brought this up in previous videos. You're going to hear it again in future videos. But I feel like if they were to bring those characters back, sure, it would be nice and it would be sweet and it would lead to a happy ending, but I kind of feel like it defeats the purpose of the original theme of FF7, which was created by Hironobu Sakaguchi, that whole idea of Gaia and returning to the planet when people die, which was heavily inspired by the death of his mother. And throughout the original FF7 into the compilation, the biggest themes we've covered for this series are life and loss. And throughout the story, all of the characters at some point lose something. Whether it's their home, a physical part of themselves, a loved one, an identity, a dream. And throughout the game, we see how these characters navigate that loss and eventually come to acceptance. That's probably the biggest aspect of that game's story. And I feel like that's the point that not only the game, but the developers are really trying to hammer home to us right now, especially for those who might be in denial about what's happened to Aerith and what will eventually happen to her, which is her probably staying dead, is that they're trying to tell us that is something that will not change and probably cannot change. And when we think about life, we lose people, we lose pets, we lose homes, we lose things, and it really freaking sucks, man. To lose someone or something that was close to you really hurts. But how we navigate that loss and eventually come to accept it, that in itself is life. Two sides of the same coin, as Aerith points out in Rebirth. And I feel like for a character like Aerith, she does have to stay dead. Zack has to stay dead because Cloud, as the player, we have to come to accept they're not coming back. It's not part of the natural order of life. And look, I understand the irony there. This is a world where we can summon dragons and fight cactuses and do really crazy feats of strength, but at the end of the day, I really feel like the devs are trying to hit us in the head and be like, no, like you have to accept those who are gone and the fact that they are gone. And I think that's a really big aspect of Cloud's journey that we will see play out in part 3. And again, it's so meta that it kind of reflects how we as the players feel. A lot of people got to the end of Rebirth and we were sad that Aerith was gone, but we were also hecka confused on what the heck was going on. We are essentially Cloud and we're getting information from his viewpoint. So we're gonna be confused, we're gonna be conflicted in how we feel. But like Cloud, we will have to come to terms in part 3 with the fact Aerith is gone, Zack is gone, and that's kind of what we have to accept. which is what Cloud eventually does in Advent Children. But again, if they can avoid all that stuff and he can kind of, make peace with it at the end of part 3, I think that kind of serves him the best, which leads to that ending again where Sephiroth is dead and gone for good, and Aerith and Zack might still be dead, but the planet is saved and everyone can kind of move on in a healthy fashion. But also, I think about the characters like Aerith and Sephiroth who are within the live stream, right? They're battling this eternal battle, waging a big war with whispers and different worlds and different versions of themselves. If Sephiroth can be defeated and he's gone for good and eradicated, that means a character like Aerith can now officially rest instead of being in the live stream battling this guy. She don't got to do that no more. So she could essentially get the chance to rest, and that I think is what that character deserves the most, is to be at peace. Same with a character like Zack. So that was a really long tangent, but like the whole fighting fate thing, I think is still part of this story. It's just maybe not quite what we all thought initially at the end of Remake of like, oh, we can save Aerith, we can save Zack. I don't really quite think it's that. Up next, Nomura talks about the white feather we see at the beginning of 7 Rebirth in that Zack and Cloud cutscene, and how he might be making a hint towards a specific character from Crisis Core. The SAD goes on to say, asked about the white feather at the start, Nomura says perhaps it's hinting at something. Here Nomura is making a pun with the Japanese word anji, which means hint or implication, in either the first half of Angeal's name or the English word angel, or both. So the way I took that was that Nomura was being his usual cryptic self and maybe having a little bit of fun, making some puns on the word angel/Angeal because of the white feather, so that could maybe be hinting at the return of Angeal. Angeal is someone who is super important to the character of Zack, and when we watch that opening cutscene, we see Zack and Cloud making their way to Midgar, and that white feather falls down. So maybe it's a situation where Angeal, who was expecting Zack to be with him in this afterlife, is now maybe looking down on him, watching out for him. Angeal essentially is like, hey man, I was supposed to pick you up in this spot like an hour ago, but now you're not there. Where are you? Text me when you get this. Or it could be a reference to Sephiroth. If we look at a lot of the stuff that's happening in Ever Crisis, the white feather stuff is now also associated with young Sephiroth. When he first shows up in that story, he jumps out of a Shinra helicopter in slow motion. There's tons of white feathers everywhere. It's like a John Woo movie. It's insane. It's gorgeous. So perhaps that white feather could be hinting at, some sort of Sephiroth involvement as well. Although Nomura kind of making that pun with the word Angeal and angel kind of makes me think Angeal might come back in some capacity in part 3, which again, I've brought this up in past videos. I know a lot of people think of Crisis Core, they think of Genesis and Angeal, and they start to go, oh no, they're gonna screw this up. Keep the compilation away from this trilogy, which is kind of silly because the compilation is fully ingrained in this remake trilogy already. But I said it before, I'll say it again, I'm all for Angeal and Genesis showing back up in Remake Part 3, primarily because looking at the compilation wasn't written the greatest, so it wasn't wonderful. And characters like Genesis and Angeal were kind of two-dimensional, almost cardboard cutout-like characters, but you bring them back and you give them the much better, deeper writing of the Remake trilogy. Characters like Angeal and Genesis could be so much better. So whether it's a flashback that Zack has where he was spending time with those characters, specifically Angeal, whether it's we battle them in a VR simulator, or if the game opens up with young Sephiroth, maybe we see those two characters there. Who knows? But they've been handling Angeal specifically really, really well in the Ever Crisis First Soldier story. He's got so much more personality this time around, and he's just an easier character to not only read their dialogue, but just kind of accept as like, oh yeah, this is actually a fully fledged dimensional character now. And I really would like to see a redemption for those characters in Part 3. And we'll end on this. Kitase talks about what will happen to FF7 after this remake trilogy and what's next for him as well. Kitase says that on account of his age, this next game will probably be the last 7 related work he'll be directly involved with. Of course, there's always a chance the world of 7 will continue on in the future. But for now, this is the end of it. With that in mind, he hopes Cloud and all the other characters will finally find happiness. He says that though they won't know how the story ends until it's actually finished, he's personally wishing that it will conclude without any unresolved feelings remaining. Now, we've talked about in the past about Kitase saying that maybe he would retire after the 7 Remake trilogy, which is really sad, but at the same time, I get it, man. He's been on this project for like over 10 years at this point. And by the time part 3 actually comes out, it'll be close to 15 years, and that's not even including everything that he and a lot of the other people at Square Enix have done since the days of Squaresoft. So he's been in the industry for a very, very long time, and this project in particular, I assume, was just so incredibly difficult and draining to actually get off of the ground and ensure that it comes out the best it can possibly be. So maybe he fully retires, or maybe there's a situation where he's still maybe a producer at Square Enix with other Final Fantasy games, but he's maybe not as involved as he currently is. So they can kind of maybe pass on the torch to the younger generation, the Naoki Hamaguchis, the Yoshi Ps, so on and so forth. As for Final Fantasy VII, I do think once Part 3 comes out, that will be it for FF7 for the time being. I think there will be like a little dormant period where they give it a rest and focus on other games, but 7 in particular is still such a valuable, recognizable brand that I don't think Square Enix is just going to want it laying dormant without anything happening. So I do think we will see these characters again, but again, we just don't really know what the capacity is, because one of the issues we've covered in many older videos was, what do you do now? You've already done the Remake trilogy, which I really love so far, and if they can stick the landing, I think it might be absolutely incredible. But what do you do afterwards? Do you do a new movie? Do you attempt DLC? Do you do a brand new game and story? Because the biggest problem you run into now is, how do you create a story and a villain that is up to par with OG FF7, the remake, as well as Sephiroth? That's going to be a big challenge to try and figure out and overcome, because it doesn't always work out well for a lot of franchises. And trying to create something that might even surpass that almost seems kind of impossible at times. So maybe the proper choice is Remake Part 3. That game ends with a more definitive ending, not necessarily like a big super happy ending like Kitase might want, but it ends. It puts a nice bow on things. And Motomo Toriyama, who's the co-director of the Remake trilogy, has said in the past that they want the ending to be more moving, and I think you can do that. I think you can give the characters a happy ending where Sephiroth is gone, the planet is saved. Of course, Aerith and Zack are still gone. They kind of have to be gone. That's kind of the whole point of the story again, is that, you know, we can fight fate and some things can change, but other things just unfortunately have to stay the same. But to give the characters and the players closure on these characters, on this world, ending maybe with Cloud smiling like he does in Advent Children, I think would put a nice bow on it. And if that's the end of FF7 for sure, as a story and like a big AAA project, I think I'd be happy with it. But I'm pretty sure, again, Cloud, Sephiroth, Tifa, some of those characters will probably show up in other properties, maybe a new Dissidia, maybe if there's a new Smash Brothers down the line, if they can get Cloud and Sephiroth back in there, that'd be cool. Again, Tifa for Tekken 8, please make it happen. Even though Tekken 8's going through some really crazy stuff right now, which is not good, I'd still like to see her in that game. But what's really interesting is, by now, the developers know how this story is going to end. A while back, Nojima finished the story. Kitase and Hamaguchi confirmed it in an interview that they did with, I believe, Famitsu. So they know how this story is going to end, what happens to all of the characters, and everyone on the team, as far as I know, Kitase, Nomura, Nojima, everyone is getting a say on how this game could end, and I think that's probably the right move. And if, again, this is the send-off, allowing the OGs kind of to have a say in like how this game ends and how they tie up the story, I think is actually kind of really nice and super poetic. So it'll be bittersweet, but the fact that we even got this remake trilogy in the first place is insane, because this, again, was the impossible game. It was never supposed to happen. It shouldn't have worked, but Remake came out, Rebirth came out, and it's going very well in my opinion. And again, if they can stick the landing in Part 3, which I have full confidence that they will, I think this could end up being not only one of my favorite trilogies of all time, but it could be one of the best trilogies that have been put out in gaming. You know, which is, you know, pretty lofty. But with that being said, that is the video. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on what we covered today, whether it's the affection system or that white feather that we see at the beginning of Rebirth. Who do you think that white feather is alluding to? Do you think it's Sephiroth or perhaps Angeal? And although it's controversial, how do you want to see this trilogy end and wrap up? Do you want a happy ending where everyone is alive, Aerith and Zack are with Cloud and Tifa and the gang partying? Or do you think it's a situation where, yeah, Aerith and Zack will die, but they will at least get the opportunity to say goodbye to everyone that's special to them? I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.